Wilko had been on our main roadways for it took 93 years, and then it happened almost suddenly. Fell apart? But this wasn't only another store going out of business. There was something deeper going on that cost thousands. Countless jobs, hurt many different British companies, and changed the UK the way you shop for the rest of your life. This is the what happened to our dear friend Wilko's. In 1930, when Britain was still experiencing the effects of the Great Depression and World War I were getting a stronger hold on Leicester, a young boy called James Key Wilkinson, with his fiancée Mary Cooper, made the decision to create a small hardware store. They named it Wilkinson Cash Stores. Not much, simply a small corner store selling brushes, brooms, nails, daily things like paraffin, and something every home needs. Back at that time, stores like Wilkinson's were around, living. You got everything you needed to keep the house running. What made Wilkinson stood out even then, it was direct back then. You knew you were getting a good deal and a useful item. He maintained the shelves clean. Clean, the stock useful, and the store easy to get to for families with jobs. And a second store in under 2 years was opened in Wigston Magna to show that the idea had legs. James Donald, Wilkinson's younger brother, already owned a store that sold hardwood in Birmingham, and 2 of his outlets, and later, Handsworth would join the chain. John, their brother, became a part of the firm, as well becoming a director in 1937, with the 3 brothers working together side. They would grow to 9 stores throughout the Midlands by the night of the World War II. That's a great feat for a family business in such harsh times, but it does tell you something. Very important. People had faith in Wilkinson. As the country fixed up its homes and after the war, the store that served had made it through hard times and was ready to grow in times of regeneration. More open branches, and by the 1950s and 60s, many knew Wilkinson well. Locations all over the Midlands. The stores were still basic, still family-friendly, but steady, trustworthy. Tony Wilkinson, James's in the 1970s, his son took over and kept that same spirit going. The family grew faster, but the expansion touch never went away. Customers might feel that it wasn't a chain with no face ordered from London. It was a job, started by a normal person, anchored in man who knew how much a pound was worth and how important it is to treat consumers fairly in a fair way. By the time a lot of us were having kids in the 80s and 90s, Wilkinson had become a part of the fabric of the main roadway. The brilliance of Wilko lay in its own brand products, which they began selling in the 1970s. There was Wilko bleach, Wilko paint brushes, and Wilko compost for the washing up liquid, and a lot of other things. The box wasn't showy, yet it was always that a little less expensive than the big brands. For family keeping an eye on their money or pensioners living attentively, it was a gift from God. You need it, and they have it. That was true for a long time. In the 2000s, Wilko had become a huge company with around 12,500 employees and 400 stores. And it's at its highest point. Turnover was over 1.6 billion pounds. That's not a tiny thing to do for a store that started out as a corner shop in Leicester store. But how long can they keep being successful? As soon as Tony Wilkinson finally stepped down around the middle of the 2000s, the business went to the family's 3rd generation. His Lisa Wilkinson, the daughter of the late owner, took over as chair, and the daily operations fell to executives who are not family members. It looked like a natural handover, a well-loved chain being led by the next generation. But in reality, the timing wasn't right. Things were shifting in retail quickly. Shopping online was getting huge. Discount stores were getting ready to fight, and the street was already starting to shake. The family still had a lot of love for the business, yet they were not the first in retail. That James, Kim, and Tony had been. Under there, if you watch, Wilko would die. For a few years before 2023, Wilko's sales were going down. They put up losing money over the last for years of business. with sales down overall by around 20% from 2017 to 2021. In the fiscal year that ended in January in 2022, Wilko lost money instead of making it. It came out to £35.9 million short. The group swung deep into the red. How that happened is a mess of things that are happening at the same time. Wilko was pressured from both sides in recent years. Competitors who were slimmer and faster on both sides, less expensive. Value and discount on one side, stores like B&M, Home Bargains, Poundland and Savers, among others, were growing quite quickly. They gave a range of products that are similar to Wilko's. Cleaning supplies, home items, and DIY things for everyday use parts, but often from stores that are significantly decreased costs of running. Retail parks or places outside of town with lower rent. Lots of parking and fewer customers' rates. Wilko stayed heavy on high street addresses with all the fines that brings. They were being attacked on by problems with price and design on both sides. Wilko couldn't compete with design. Stores like Dunelm or IKEA that changed home goods into lifestyle, furniture, not simply usefulness but also decor and design appeal. Wilko has a practical utilitarian identity that worked for some customers but had a hard time when people expected a little more visual appeal or design that people want. Then you have the expense side. The high street was battered heavily in 2020, and Wilko was no different. Footfall at high street stores saw a decline of around 40% during the lockdowns of 2020, even when stores were allowed to open. And shoppers, the numbers were considerably down, especially in retail malls and city centers. Government help with business tax breaks, tax holidays, and limits on asking landlords for rent helped ease the pain for a short time, but those supports hid problems that are at the root. When the help stopped, bills, rent, energy expenditures, and other fixed costs came back with a bang, leaving Wilko open. Brexit made logistics and supply chains more difficult. Wilko gets its supplies from a lot of different countries, in and out of the EU. After the UK's withdrawal from the EU and customs duties, extra paperwork, longer wait periods, and increased expenses for importing became part of the truth. Suppliers and shipping to it was more likely that distribution centers would risk increased costs or delays, which for a retailer already under pressure from margin and supply pressure made it harder to get stock, likely, and made it tougher to plan. Another issue was the real nature of few of Wilko's ranges. They sold big things that don't work for a quick town buy in the center unless you have a car or a delivery service ready to go. Changing heavy or hard-to-handle things out of a high street stores cause real problems for people, and more money for fulfillment. And when customers are expecting home delivery to be easier and easier, that discrepancy started to affect delivery. Amazon and the online store business took off. A younger generation was getting used to tapping a calling and having their things show up on the next day at the door. Older still customers who were unsure at first started to depend on purchasing online during the years of the pandemic. Wilko did have a website, but it never got to be the powerhouse it needed to be. Buying compared to Amazon's smooth convenience, Wilko's online store looked heavy. With the chain having hundreds of big retailers on the high street, the business got more and more costly to run in a time when footfall was going down in a lot of town centers. Less there are stable rents and more shoppers in town. Rates become a much bigger problem. While stores that offer discounts and stores that are not in town retailers were cutting costs and running leaner. Wilko was paying for overhead on locations that its sales were just too low to be able to cover. It didn't help that by the end of 2022 and Wilko was going through a lot of changes in 2023. Change in its top management. Alterations that many people thought were attempts to pull everything, but also signals that the business was in a hurry, maybe without a plan that lasts for a long time. In Jerome Satt was the CEO in December 2022. Mark left and Mark took his position. Jackson from Benson's for beds in what the business called a move to bring back trust and protect the future of the store. At almost the same moment in the managing director in January 2023, after only around 18 months in the role, Allison Hans quit. Months on the job. That kind of Wilko didn't have much to do with turnover at the top levels. Time to put the plan into action, as every new leader tends to bring their own ideas that might not fit with the plans that are already in place can be delayed. In the meanwhile, the financial leaders had its share of problems. Karen McKay is the chief financial officer, stepped down in early 2022 and was succeeded by Dave Murphy. Karen McKay had took over from Alex Russo, who had only had the finance job for a few years before leaving. These changes show that Wilko was aiming to change the structure. They wanted to find someone who could keep the ship steady, but the frequent changes also show a lack of coherence. Unstable senior levels tend to sweep down, and it did. There were already in early 2023 talk about layoffs. In February, firm said it will lose more than 400 jobs employment in a restructure to save money. These people weren't just workers on the shop floor. Assistant managers of stores, retail supervisors, managers at the central office, and call everyone who worked at the center was on the line. Some store bosses had their hours cut down. Some roles were being given to someone else. In terms of operations, the problems got worse. One of them was a lack of stock. There were spaces between the shelves. Logistics are behind schedule suggested that things were late or not there. This made customers come expecting to look for anything they had seen before and being let down when you find out it's out of stock signage or shelves that are empty. Suppliers in some deliveries were late, or they didn't want to do it to collaborate with Wilko because of worries regarding bills that haven't been paid or credit risks. All smaller businesses were around the country left outstanding bills for nursing, some of ranging into the hundreds of thousands of pounds. For example, in Oldham, for companies lost almost £300,000 out of pocket. The biggest is Hunter. Price International, a toy and gift supplier, the supplier was owing more than £200,000. The hit was more than in Sussex. £1 million across a number of businesses. Paladone Products in Shawham and Rug Doctor in Worthing, and even Nestle Purina's local arm had money tied up in the full of Wilko. It was the same thing. In Worcestershire, where they sell cleaning supplies manufacturer Mapasbone Tex and Comco Fire Systems were left waiting for money. In Lancaster, companies like Plants of Blackburn and What Else in Burnley were collectively due millions of dollars. Companies in Essex too, there were 14 of them left over. £1.2 million short, which includes Profit, a company that sells pet food in bulk, suddenly finds itself without almost it was relying on £500,000. What the list of Wilko's creditors showed that how deeply British culture is woven into the chain had been sewn together for commerce. By Wilko's problems were unthinkable in 2022 to not pay attention to. It shut down 15 stores that year, saying it was part of an estate lookover. But people who worked in retail know what that meant. The business was trying to decrease costs so they can stay afloat on top. It was a clue that something was wrong. That Wilko, who used to be reliable, was having trouble getting used to it. In the summer of 2023, the people started talking. People heard about it. That suppliers weren't getting paid on time. In the background, the Wilkinson the family was trying to make a bargain. A beer, an investor, or anybody else who might provide them a lifeline. Then on the 10th they mentioned it clearly on August. Wilko was heading into management. After 93 years, the business couldn't meet its money owed. Almost 400 stores were suddenly at risk along with more than 12,000 jobs. For a chain that used to look as strong as the masonry on the high street, it was amazing. It was mind-blowing. As of August, as time went on, the first announcements were made. Some stores would be closing in weeks. After the shock of Wilko going into administration, there was a glimmer of hope. Talk of buyers swooping in to rescue the day started making rounds. And for a little while, it nearly seemed like Wilko would rise again. Doug was the most famous person in the picture. Putman is the Canadian guy who owns HMV. People were arguing that if he could save the record stores, he might be able to accomplish the same for Wilko, and his plan sounded very ambitious. He intended to keep as many as 300 stores open, saving thousands of jobs all at once. People were for a while held onto that, but as the days went by, Putman's bid started to fall apart. Suppliers didn't think they would got paid. The network for distribution, the rise, the warehouses, the whole Wilko's backbone was creaking and costly. The prices were just too a lot. It went apart by the beginning of September. So close, yet so far. That failed offer felt like the last blow to the gut. By in September, the trickle became a flood. Wilko goes up and down. The country started to close down. Nottingham, Sheffield, Hull, and Huddersfield, Middlesbrough, you name it. After the town lost its big red anchor sign, store, when PwC confirmed to administrators that more than 50 to Wilko stores would close. That round cost 1,300 jobs. By itself, then, when the breakdown got worse, it was evident that all 400 or so stores would close by the start of October. That meant almost 12,000 people lost their jobs, which was almost the whole staff. In works locally, the main office and the place where things are sent out cuts were very bad. At one point, 237 staff at the head office were told their roles were being made redundant. 220 were lost at the distribution center there, plus 17 in digital operations. That added up to more than 500 jobs in that area by itself. And it wasn't just that the problem was they lost their jobs. The way it was, which is why they were let go. A lot workers claimed they first learned about losing a job through TV or the news announcements, not talking to people directly, even following years of faithful service. A man that he has worked at Wilko for 16 years was only warned a few days ahead of time extra work. The lack of certainty was quite hard for these people. Employees didn't know which businesses would close and how many hours they would have, if they would be moved or lose their jobs. For many, their jobs were up in the air, for weeks. Even in places where retailers were purchased by other stores, people generally didn't get jobs under those agreements. Most of the layoffs happened before any rebranding or reopening under new owners. And by the start of October 2023, it was done. Every single store had shut down the shutters. What had taken it took 100 years to build, but it was gone in a few months. The numbers tell their own story. 400 stores closed and many more made the high streets a little less busy. When it was clear when the dust settled that the company Wilko was no longer in business, but pieces were cut up and sold, every piece going in a different direction. The Wilko brand name, website, and intellectual property were scooped up for about $5 million by CDS Superstores, the primary firm behind The Range. Too many. This felt like the ultimate twist of the knife. That meant they now own the right to use the Wilko name, sell products under it, and run Wilko.com among other things. With that power, CDS relaunched Wilko.com, over 100,000 products made available to buy again via the site. And in the Range shops, Wilko-branded products began appearing. Then in December 2023, the first small-format physical Wilko stores reopened, Plymouth and Exit. Following that, others opened as part of CDS's plan to roll out Wilko concept or standalone shops. Again, these are far fewer in number and much smaller in size than the old big high street Wilko stores. As of summer of 2024, there were about 5 Wilko stores open under the new ownership. CDS also reintroduced click and collect services. Customers can order via Wilko.com and pick up from reopened Wilko stores or the Range's many collection points. The name Wilko survived, yes, but not in the way people hoped. The beloved red and white logo would live on, mostly online, divorced from the familiar high street shops that once gave it meaning. B&M and Poundland swooped in for the store sites. They weren't buying Wilko to keep it alive. They were cherry-picking. B&M grabbed around 50 locations and Poundland took on more than 70 sites, but all to be rebranded under their own banners. Where once you'd nip into Wilko for a tin of paint and a bag of pick and mix, you'd now be greeted by Poundland's teal or B&M's orange. What hit hardest about Wilko's full wasn't just the shuttered shop fronts or the logo disappearing from our high streets. It was the people left behind. More than 12,000 workers lost their jobs, many of them with years, even decades of service behind their belts. You'd hear accounts of folk who'd started as Saturday youngsters in the 80s or 90s and worked their way up to managers, unexpectedly told there'd be no place for them come Monday morning. For some, Wilko was a second home, a family of kinds, and it was taken away from them. That's all there is to it. Right now, there are hopes for Wilko to grow even more retailers in the range. The long-term CDS Superstores admits that their goal is to open as many as 300 Wilko outlets eventually, though early rollout is careful. It looks like the main goal is making sure the new stores work, testing formats, and hiring staff, such as putting ex-Wilko employees first where possible.